Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast, your ticket to all things college football. Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? Join us as we talk college football, from the national championship to college rivalries to bowl games to the Heisman Trophy to which conference is the best. We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between.
Thanks for tuning in to the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jessica Kofi, and as we are well aware of by now, the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic has had an unprecedented effect on the sports world as a whole, and while leagues are looking months ahead to determine the chances of picking up where they left off, the question of what kind of changes this epidemic will have on the upcoming college football season is starting to seriously cross a lot of minds, and virtually nothing about the current state of the game is certain right now, including a potential start date for the regular season. And as of right now, it's still scheduled to start on time as planned, but we are very used to the fact that anything can happen and change on a day's notice. So we're just going to have to keep our eye out on changes that are coming forward. And the question is going to continue to be asked by so many people around the college football world. And they're asking, frankly, questions that don't really have definitive answers at the moment because the crisis is continuing to evolve. But we do know that few cultures operate under such strict measures like college football does. And with the virus upending even the most basic of institutions in the off-season routine on campus, like recruitment or even just preparation for the season, it's hard to tell exactly what players, teams, or even the game itself is going to look like by the time August or September hits, or whenever a more familiar looking life resumes for all of us. So even though it is still the off-season, it is still months in advance, cancellations are beginning to roll out, and we're officially hitting uncharted waters. So in this episode, we're going to take a look at the effects of COVID-19 on college football. And we're going to start in the first segment by talking about, are there any alternate solutions? So starting with a report from the Sports Business Journal, it indicated that colleges have thought of moving the 2020 season to the summer to avoid a potential second round of COVID-19 infections in the fall. And at least one Power 5 official is not in favor of that thought and told Sports Illustrated that the idea is, quote, the most absurd thing I've heard so far, and unquote. And he is not the only one to feel that way. A lot of fans and other officials have voiced their displeasure, to say it mildly, at the idea of moving the season to the summer, and not a lot of people are taking it seriously. Every other scenario that's been proposed has the season starting later in the fall, at a time when the virus could be returning for another round of infections as the cool weather returns, which is what's being loosely predicted right now by experts, and a vaccine is most likely not going to be available in this calendar year. But I guess the idea behind holding a shortened college football season over the summer is that it presents an opportunity to play games when the warm weather could help prevent the spread of the virus. But that does carry a lot of logistical issues and hurdles to overcome, like finding a campus that's able to hold games and in an area that's able to support the amount of people that come with a team, even just for a game. It goes just beyond the crowds. There are large rosters, there are large coaching staffs, television broadcasters, because people are obviously going to want to watch it at home. That's how probably the only way they're going to be able to watch it. There's radio equipment, there's security. Tailgaters probably won't be an issue in this case, but there are always going to be people who are going to be people who want to or are going to attempt to. But there are a lot of other significant challenges that cause issues when it comes to worries about public health in this situation. So it'll be difficult to get all those people on board, in addition to media partners who need to be willing to broadcast those games in the first place. And again, deciding whether or not fans can even attend, and if they can, whether or not they want to attend games that are played in extreme heat, especially if they're playing in some parts of the country, especially the South. So they're more worried about a potential loss of revenue, but there's a lot to figure out in such a short notice, especially when this pandemic is continuing to spread rapidly across the country and across the world, really, still. And so far, football has avoided the impact of the pandemic, but it doesn't look like that's going to last much longer. And you can look to a survey taken of most of the 130 FBS athletic directors, and they were very adamant that if there was no season, it would be devastating for the NCAA and the college football world. But nearly a fifth of them, when asked, believe that there's at least a 50% chance of an abbreviated season in 2020. But they did, several of them did admit that they probably were giving a more favorable answer because they wanted to remain positive and optimistic about the season taking place. But there are some in that realm that are taking a more realistic approach, like Texas A&M AD, who told Dallas Morning News that he couldn't even comprehend playing next season's games in empty stadiums because of all of the associated, financing and everything that comes with having people physically come to a game. That's obviously a huge part of the sport and always has been. That's the root of it and where it started. So he makes a point there, taking that realistically into account. And some coaches are joining him on that page, like Virginia's head coach Bronco Mendenhall, who is already preparing as if a delayed season or canceled season has been called. Like, he's looking at it as if it's an inevitable, and he might not be alone, because most are forecasting the worst case scenario and are already expecting a 20% decrease in revenue for the next season, even if it's just abbreviated and not canceled. So other ideas could include breaking up the 12 regular season games throughout the fall and spring semesters, spreading them out, holding the college football playoff in May or possibly even June, and conducting a 9-game regular season instead. So the one Power 5 AD said the idea would be to play an entire season split between 2 semesters if they were forced to postpone. So some bowl games may not happen because of this. They may just be cut out, but they think that they'd be able to fit in a full regular season and a majority of the bowls, obviously the New Year's Six ones, the most prominent ones, and the playoffs. And they have been very adamant, especially recently, about the fact that they want the college football playoffs to happen. And several other coaches haven't been afraid to vocalize their concerns about next season either, like Notre Dame head coach Brian Kelly on SportsCenter in an interview said that it'd be difficult for him to see the season starting on time if players can't begin conditioning in July, which is a really good point for him to make, and a lot of other sports are also taking that into account, because a lot of athletes don't have access to strength and conditioning coaches, and a lot of the resources that they would have if they were able to be on campus, and like nutrition is a big part of it, and a lot of those things they're just not going to get spread out across the country in their own lockdown in their own homes. So just like how the NBA is considering a 25-day buffer period for conditioning before they would resume a season, they're also proposing that if they're not able to resume training camps on time, in time to start the season, then it may not be realistic for them to be able to go. But as much as there are many head coaches and ADs and a lot of just people in power across college football who are attempting to find an alternate solution, not every coach seems to be on that same page, like Oklahoma State head coach Mike Leach, who was heavily criticized for still aiming for May 1st as a return to normal for football date. And his quote really didn't come off leaving him sounding really good, and in case you haven't heard it by now, he said, quote, "How fast can that happen based on the tests that are available? I can't say right now, but that's the plan. We have to have a plan, and the plan right now is for them to start on May 1st. It may get backed up 2 weeks. I don't know. I can't make that call. But if it does, we'll start with the employees of this company, the ones that come in this building. Then we'll bring players in, and slowly but surely we'll test them all in. Maybe they don't come back," he said, of older employees or anybody with an underlying condition. But the majority of people in this building who are healthy, and certainly the 18, 19, 20, 21, 22-year-olds that are healthy, the so-called medical people saying the herd of healthy people that have the antibodies may be built up and can fight this, we all need to get back to work, unquote. And obviously that's a very harsh point of view to take, to say the least. But he definitely did get called out for it, and it was pointed out how irresponsible a stance like that is, to prioritize something like, as much as we all love it, football over the health and safety of all of these people involved, and to try and put people in positions that could possibly harm them just doesn't seem like a worthy football decision to make, or just even a smart decision to make. So whoever makes the call on the green light for the college football season can probably take notes from the unfortunate ending of the college basketball season as a result of this virus. Just to recap that, last month the NCAA initially ruled on March 11th that fans would not be permitted to attend the men's basketball tournament before changing course the very next day and canceling the entire March Madness tournament outright, along with all the other winter and spring championships for the academic year. And all the Power 5 conferences and many others canceled their respective college basketball tournaments that same day, after also planning to ban fans initially. And for a number of conferences, teams were practicing and warming up just minutes or hours before tip-off, before the cancellations began piling up. So spring football has already been canceled across the country. Many adjustments could be made, like an OTA-style mini camp, possibly running earlier in the summer, around June or July, have been anticipated. But all in all, it's just a smart idea to take a good full look at the situation before making any decisions to proceed. And now it's time for our first break, but when we come back, we're going to talk about whether or not the season will realistically go on.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the College Football Podcast. And before the break, we talked about the alternate ideas for the upcoming college football season. And in this segment now, we're going to talk about whether or not the season will be canceled or not. And there are a lot of varying ideas when it comes to this. ESPN analyst Kirk Herbstreit has said multiple times that he'd be shocked if the NFL or college football seasons take place because of this COVID-19 pandemic. And he discussed the potential of football being canceled this year and said that if he was in charge of either the NFL or the NCAA, he'd already be set to announce that the football season was being canceled. Just because from what he explained, we are still far off from a vaccine, and it wouldn't make a lot of sense to let these young players into locker rooms and maybe fill up stadiums and require workers to come in to play football. It doesn't, the optics of it wouldn't look great, especially if sports around it were still shut down. And you never know, the next thing you could know, you have a whole locker room full of people that are sick. So he was making the point that he would not want to have that, which is a good point. And he added that the limited preparation time, which was mentioned earlier by other ADs and head coaches, would also be a factor, even if the COVID-19 outlook started to improve by late in the summer. Because you can't really come up at the end around August and say, okay, we're good to go, and then start the season as if everything has gone as planned. These players need and deserve a lot more preparation time to be able to play, and that will need to be built into whatever schedule they decide to go with. Multiple college football coaches have shared a curiosity about who'd be making the call in the first place on an all clear and how it'd be made down the road for this sport. So conferences across the country have already banned athletic competitions of any type through the end of this academic year and already imposed various restrictions on practices, other gatherings, and the NCAA itself has also banned all recruiting in Division I athletics through at least May 31st. And week 0 of the 2020 football season, as it's called, is scheduled for the weekend of August 29th right now, with the majority of programs scheduled to take off on September 5th. But Oklahoma Sooners head coach Lincoln Riley is still one that's hoping that football can be somewhat of a healing force for the country, and if it's able to come back, it could help the world emerge from this COVID-19 pandemic. And he said that he feels by the time the season is supposed to come around, that the world is going to need football, and acknowledge that a lot of how the decision is going to be made is going to be based off of how the country responds and how we as individuals respond and how seriously everybody takes it. So hopefully that everybody can do the best they can. And he makes a good point there, and he's not the only head coach of a football powerhouse that is stressing the importance of taking this virus seriously and doing what's necessary in the interest of public health. Even LSU head coach Ed Orgeron has hopped in on that, and so is Alabama head coach Nick Saban and Ohio State head coach Ryan Day. And they've all issued public announcements asking fans to stay safe and do their part in spreading the awareness and correct information for this virus. And in the event that leagues do start to come back around June, say, which is June or July, which is what the aim looks like for this time, they might have to do so without fans, and that is probably the most realistic part of the situation that people can agree on right now, depending on what recommendations from health officials look like going forward. But since the stadium atmosphere accounts for so much of the pageantry that we love surrounding college football, the absence of fans would have a much bigger impact on games than we probably realize right now. Not that it's the most important thing, but it would definitely be noticed. So any COVID-19 related measures would likely have to be uniform across the FBS rather than just conferences deciding on their own. That's probably the only way they'd be able to realistically come up with a plan that would work safely. And there's also plenty of discussion about how the NCAA or Power 5 schools might find extra practice time for players once they get back onto campus, because that is a really important side point when it comes to pushing the season back to. The players and their preparation, they cannot be neglected in this situation and just in favor of the money that the NCAA or that the conferences or that the universities will make. But even under a best case scenario, it would be more of a crash course than a tried and true installation. And even at schools where the coaching staff has some stability already, there would still be plenty of new players that are trying to figure things out. So it would be in their best interest to make sure that their players are taken care of. And if that's not possible, then it doesn't look like it'd be possible to have a season. Now we're going to take our next break. But when we come back, we're going to discuss how the spring and how schools individually have already been impacted.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the College Football Podcast. And in the first two segments of this episode, we talked about the alternative solutions for a college football season if it has to be postponed due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and whether or not it realistically could be canceled and what that might look like. And now in this third segment, we're going to talk about how the spring practices and universities have been impacted so far. If you were to ask a coach in college football about his biggest concerns today, and right after he mentions the health of his staff and players, obviously first, the next word would be academics. I mentioned a little bit in the earlier segments, but on campus, players have access to a wealth of assistance resources, from face-to-face meetings with professors to daily tutoring sessions to quality control staff, looking over their shoulders to make sure that their work gets done the right way. But now you're placing everybody in an online environment and you just don't have the same connection. So this is another area of uncharted territory. And Miami head coach Manny Diaz agreed with that, saying, quote, "There are ramifications in terms of progress toward a degree, and you worry about whether everyone on your team has access to the equipment needed. It's not a given," unquote. So far, teams have been seen to mail out computers and portable Wi-Fi hotspots to players that need them, and tutors are setting up Zoom meetings and using other video conferencing technology to meet with students. And many schools are offering the opportunity to switch to pass-fail grading, and that helps in ways, but even that presents problems in itself, because some players that need to stay eligible might not be able to, or it might not be in their best personal interest because they might have certain plans already mapped out for the upcoming year. And learning to take classes online in itself, going from in-person to online, is a really unique experience, and it's not as easy as it sounds to most people who haven't done it. But the biggest concern that comes from this is keeping every player academically eligible for 2020, and that won't be likely or an easy task, and it wouldn't be a huge surprise if the NCAA loosens the restrictions for the semester and we still see some big names not make the cut for eligibility. And that is very much at play for a lot of players in this situation. But in addition to that, recruiting has taken a big hit because right as it started for the class of 2021 and beyond, they were about to kick into gear, it came to a screeching halt, and all of the shutdowns that have come out of quarantine have spared not a single industry, and that includes recruitment in college football. And recruitment is often seen as the lifeblood of a lot of programs, and it should be because of the way college football operates. The college system is very unique in that way, but there is always an angle that they're able to work. So whether it's due to luck or good preparation or circumstances or just being able to adapt, some programs are going to be hit harder than others. And during the current recruitment pause, others won't learn how to thrive. And some coaches are working from home, some are working from their vacation homes, some are taking shifts in the office, and some are unfortunately still fully staffed way longer than they should have been, but they're all currently playing by the same restricted recruiting rules. And the NCAA did announce that the dead period would be extended through at least May 31st. It's starting to look like that it will be extended past that. And that is still banning in-person recruiting, but it does still allow for phone calls, text messages, other written correspondences, and that has given some type of leeway for the recruitment to continue, or at least start in a toned-down way. But it's still a huge interruption in the NCAA's recruitment calendar. So for programs at the FBS level, an evaluation was set to start from April 15th and run through May 31st. And already most colleges, if not all colleges at this point, have canceled spring practices and spring games and high school camps, combines, 7-on-7 events, all of types of events across the country have all been canceled too. So many coaches are looking to the summer as the next opportunity to possibly get on the road and get around their players. But by that point, whether or not it's even deemed safe it still remains to be seen. But critical recruiting and evaluation time would totally be erased from the calendar, and we're likely to see those effects play out in the sport for the next couple of years going forward, no matter when things start to resemble getting back to normal. But even though it is true that recruiting trips are postponed and camps and showcases are also put on pause, but luckily modern technology has allowed some recruits and coaches to keep in touch by way of phone, which was just mentioned as being allowed, even though there is a recruitment dead period imposed by the NCAA. And even LSU head coach Ed Orgeron said in an interview that he's been on the phone constantly with recruits from the 2021 and the 2022 classes. And that's the main reason he cited as his recruiting plan remaining unscathed from a communication standpoint at the very least. And he said it's been helpful because the kids are bored, honestly, like most of us are, who are at home and are trying to self-isolate. A number of people are available now to talk and can actually meet on Skype or on Zoom or respond to that message. So he's just one of many coaches and programs that are making do with these tough circumstances and are trying to use technology to give a virtual tour in a way of their program. And just like LSU, Kansas, led by former LSU coach Les Miles, had a virtual junior day, and recruits could check in online and remain engaged throughout the day way into the evening. Virginia Tech is another school that's getting creative, and they've brought in former players who told stories of their favorite moments from their time at school. And even Texas A&M actually set up a Madden tournament between the coaches and their recruits. So it's put a lot of strain on the normalcy of how coaches would go about their recruitment period, but it's also brought out a lot of creativity as well. And it's shown that the coaches and coaching staffs are determined to not let players fall behind and be affected more than they should be by everything that's going on. And with all that being said, a complete cancellation of the season would have a steep impact on the financial bottom line of most FBS schools, unfortunately. And that's just a realistic fact, especially in the group of five, who are not schools that bring in nearly as much money as the big names you see on TV every Saturday. And because of, previous revenue streams in the tens of millions, those schools in the Power Five are better equipped to handle this kind of development. But at least one Power Five school is getting ahead of the financial strain that could possibly fall onto the college football world. And Iowa State AD Scott Pollard unveiled several initiatives that they're implementing already in the athletics department to prepare for the known, the unknown, and just general financial challenges that they're going to be facing soon. And the most noteworthy initiative out of his proposed plan involves a 1-year reduction in coaches' pay, and that alone will save the athletic department more than $3 million. And additionally, bonuses for coaches have been suspended, saving around $1 million. So that definitely is one of the first signs of the toll that we're going to start to see unfold throughout college football. And we are far from seeing the total toll that is going to be taken on the sport. And now it's time for another break, but when we come back, we're going to talk about how some athletes and those related to college football are doing their part to help out.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red-hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's gsmcpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the College Football Podcast. And before the break, we talked about how the spring semester and practices and how individual universities have been affected and will continue to be affected going forward by this pandemic. But in this segment, we're going to talk about how athletes around the college world have been helping out so far. And one of the most notable has been in search of face masks. And there has been a great increase in the need for face masks, obviously since this has taken over, and many are attempting to chip in and help produce as many as possible. So among those taking action to produce face masks is Michigan State Head Equipment Manager Andrew Kolpacki, and he, along with his friends, have been spending time learning how to make face masks suitable for those working in high-risk jobs fighting the pandemic. And he's committed to making the face mask for as long as he's in isolation for. And Kopacki and two of his friends have produced around 100 masks to date while working about 4 hours a day. So the masks have been distributed to local healthcare workers, nursing homes, family, friends, and they learned how to make them by watching videos on YouTube, as anyone else can do and probably has been doing these days. So Kopacki, whose own mother is a nurse, has his own sewing machine, and he was ready to just step up and take action. So every little bit helps in times like these, especially with medical facilities and PPE, and the scramble for just the simplest of protective equipment. So the contribution that he's made there cannot go understated. And speaking of face masks, the Auburn Athletic Department's equipment staff has also stepped up to help create face masks and taking the lead from Andrew Kopacki and medical professionals. And several groups from Auburn are doing what they can to help the doctors and patients around their state of Alabama by donating ventilators and other medical supplies, along with multiple other schools in the area. And their athletic staff is also doing its part as well to help create the masks run in short supply. But other needs are being taken care of as well, and some of the biggest names across sports have assisted in that by donating items for an auction, with proceeds going to COVID-19 relief. And the auction is being run through the Collectible Exchange, and 36 items currently open for bidding before closing on May 3rd. So among these physical items to purchase from the college football world would be an autographed Tua Tagovailoa Alabama jersey, starting at $450, and a signed Barry Sanders pair of shoes, starting bid going for $350. But if you're not looking to bid on merchandise and would rather bid on experiences, fans can also go for meet and greets with several sports celebrities, including a lunch for four with Basketball Hall of Famer Bill Walton in San Diego for a whopping $7,500, or you could just go for a video chat with Syracuse coach Jim Boeheim for just $200. But the help from athletes does not stop there, and Trevor Lawrence, Clemson quarterback, has hopped in on the action too, along with his girlfriend Marissa Mowry, and they've started a new fundraiser to aid with relief efforts for the ongoing pandemic by announcing the launch of the official Trevor Lawrence and Marissa Mowry COVID-19 Relief Fund to help their friends and neighbors in the Cartersville and upstate South Carolina communities deal with some of the challenges brought on by this situation. And they originally set up a GoFundMe page the week before, but it was reportedly taken down by Clemson's compliance department, who asked Trevor to take it down because it was the fear that he might be in violation of NCAA rules, preventing players from using their names, images, and likenesses for crowdfunding. But the NCAA later said in a statement that they did not ask Trevor Lawrence to take down the page and applauded him for his efforts instead. And the original GoFundMe raised $2,600 before it was taken down, and the new fundraiser is now being managed by the Cartersville Bardo Community Foundation, and money and gifts are eligible for donation still. So he's able to continue with his efforts with no interruption. And they both also noted that they intend to partner with nonprofit centers and will announce going forward how the funds that are raised are going to be distributed. So that is a really great thing for them to be able to start on their own, and kudos to the NCAA for once realizing the bigger picture on their own and not standing in the way of him doing the right thing. And following in his footsteps was Texas quarterback Sam Ehlinger, who received approval from the NCAA before he set up his GoFundMe account, obviously learning from Trevor's mistakes. And he announced on Twitter that funds that he's raising will be donated to various institutions, including the Boys and Girls Club of America, Pets Alive in Austin, and the Central Texas Food Bank. So he also cited obviously Trevor Lawrence and his girlfriend for setting a strong example for him to follow. And he also thanked the NCAA for allowing him to start the GoFundMe of his own. But there are other ways that athletes around the college world are helping out, and it's not always in money donations. Sometimes what's needed is a little bit of a morale boost and motivation for people who are sitting at home and others who are just struggling to stay motivated during this time. And who other than Peyton Manning to provide some perspective. And he made a surprise appearance in a communications course video conference for his alma mater, the University of Texas. And he crashed Professor John Haas's class, who he has a special relationship with, and even honored Professor John Haas by donating $1 million to Tennessee to establish the John Haas Student Experimental Learning Endowment. So he has a close relationship with the professor, obviously after playing for the Volunteers from 1994 to 1997, and had his jersey retired by the school in 2005, and clearly holds a special place in that school's history after leading them to the SEC championship in 97, before obviously becoming the NFL legend that we know of him today. So he had a little bit of a back and forth with his close friend Haas, and ultimately had words of encouragement for the students who are, just like most of us, who are sitting in isolation, still facing a difficult situation. And he was able to stay relatable to the students, acknowledging that this is not an ideal way to spend a school year, especially the senior year for those students in that class, and encourage them to just keep a positive attitude and keep on working and use a little bit of the extra time to accomplish something or help somebody in need. So because there are a lot of people hurting during this time, the reminder to be thankful for what you have and where you are despite everything going on is just something that you can take a moment to do. And it's equally important to realize that as much as we can support the people around us, we also have the people around us to support us as well. And for him to return to a class at Tennessee virtually and remind students of that and really show what the university cares about and what universities should care about is really refreshing to see, especially in a time like this. Now it's time for another break, but when we come back, we're going to talk about things to look forward to if there is a season.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA, from the UFC to extreme cage fighting. They got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the College Football Podcast. Before the break, we talked about the various areas that have been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic in the college football world, whether or not there will be a season, how athletes have been pitching in, and how athletic directors and head coaches are feeling about possible plans going forward. But in this last segment, we're going to take a look at things that we have to look forward to if the season does go forward. So there was a lot of anticipation for this season because we were coming off of one of the most impressive seasons that we've ever seen in college football history. And LSU, the reigning national champions, will take the field in September, hopefully, but unfortunately without much public national backing, especially for a team that's defending a national championship. And in fact, a lot of publications so far have placed Ed Orgeron's squad outside of the top 5 in way too early rankings. And they're kind of a byproduct of their own success because they're dealing with massive personnel losses across the board and noticeable coaching staff changes. But for 3 straight years now, his team has been undersold during the preseason as a dark horse challenger in the SEC, but with no real threat to win it, largely due to their lengthy losing skid to Alabama before last season. Besides finally working through those demons, it still seems like they're not getting the level of respect they might deserve, especially heading into a new season, coming in as the fresh champions. But besides LSU, there are a number of teams that are either underrated or overrated based off of last year's performance going to this next season. So looking ahead, what we possibly could see from this season, here's a little bit of where teams are expected to fall. Teams like Penn State or Georgia, who usually get a lot of attention, could actually be a little overrated this year. Especially for Penn State, they're expected to be at the high end, and you can't discredit the job that head coach James Franklin has done. But they might have one of the nation's top defenses this fall, but they might be ranked a little bit too highly, and they'll end up being the last team out, so to speak, when it comes to the college football playoff. And there might be a few more teams that are good enough across the country to fill that slot of last team out. So Penn State necessarily won't look like they'll be the team that's fighting to make it into the playoffs. As well as Georgia, they probably won't be making the playoffs, especially coming out of their conference. But they're definitely worthy of a top 10 ranking. Even though there's no real way to tell what their offense is going to look like next year. And they could possibly survive off of defense and just competent quarterbacking alone, but there's no way to make that judgment yet. Oregon might also fall into the category of one of those slightly overrated teams, and that's because their stock is nearing an all-time high right now, and there's a lot of hype around them, especially because of the Pac-12's lack of elite teams near the top. They don't really have much competition up there, but we'll have to wait and see if their new quarterback, Tyler Shaw, could replicate the leadership qualities and playmaking that Justin Herbert brought to the table last year. As far as teams that might be a little bit overlooked, USC might be considered in one of those classes because they'll have the talent advantage in most of their scheduled matchups for this year, and they are already better than people expected them to be in 2019. So there's nothing stopping them from making another leap. And in that same spirit, North Carolina, which is never considered a football team, is also a little bit underrated. And they'll definitely benefit from having 2 extremely challenging games right out of the gate versus nationally ranked competition. So if they're able to plow through their early obstacles, they could be New Year's Six potential by the end of the season. And that's saying a lot for a program like UNC in football. And as for teams that are a little bit on the bubble and they could fall either way, you could definitely place Texas in that category because they had a little bit of a disappointing, so to speak, 2019 season because they had a lot of expectations for themselves, and it was fueled more of on a narrative of Texas making their big return. But they still have a lot of talent and a lot of returning experience, and this is the season where they should be placing their expectations a little bit higher. It's just a matter of if they hit the field, will they be able to live up to it this time around? And Alabama, surprisingly, can also fall into the same kind of class because they will definitely be expecting to be back in the national championship conversation for next season. And as long as their defense returns to form, as we've come to expect from them, and they are able to avoid the injuries that kind of knocked them off last season, we could see the Alabama dynasty return to what we once knew it as. And outside of possible team performances, there are also a lot of notable head coaching changes and a lot of new exciting faces that we're going to see in places in the fall, such as Ole Miss hiring Lane Kiffin, Baylor hiring head coach Dave Aranda, Mike Norvell heading to Florida State, Mike Leach now at Mississippi State, even though he's created a little bit of controversy before his team has even hit the field. Eli Drinkwitz at Missouri, Sam Pittman is now at Arkansas, Jimmy Lake is at Washington, and Mel Tucker is now taking over at Michigan State. And while we can't wait to see some of those head coaches lead their new squads, there are some games specifically that we should also be really hyped to catch that are between teams that don't usually play each other. And this year has a lot of interesting, unique matchups. From week 1, if things go according to schedule, we might want to pay attention to Michigan versus Washington. And that is quite an interesting Big Ten meets Pac-12 kind of matchup. In week 2, there are actually 2 to keep your eye on. Texas is taking on LSU, and Ohio State is taking on Oregon. In week 5, Notre Dame will be facing Wisconsin, and Notre Dame gets another spotlight in week 10 when they take on Clemson. And there are obviously a lot of games to be hyped for in this upcoming season. Those are just a few to keep your eyes on. And I think that just goes to show that for all the potential pitfalls and this new reality surrounding college football, there are some potential silver linings and advantages too. Like, look at Clemson, and the way they're looking at it is that this is a little break away from campus, and they're taking advantage of it that way. And for good reason, because the Tigers have played 30 games in the last 2 years, have had a nearly 365-day routine. So this break might be a blessing in disguise, not just for them, but for the college football world as a whole. Especially for players who need to take the time to let their bodies recover and not stay worn out and beat up from continuously having to perform. So the takeaway from most coaches at this point is that they spent years preaching the same mantra about discipline and accountability, especially at programs where they have a long-standing tradition. It might be a little bit of a downside for programs that are trying to implement something new or have young recruits that are trying to come in. But there are also ways that the sport has adapted to fit in ways for new systems to adapt as well. And it's time for these players, especially the ones who are in familiar programs and areas, to prove that the lessons they've learned and are learning now are sinking in. At some point there will be football again, and when the ball snapped for that first time, it'll be made very clear who made the most of this time away and who didn't. And for right now, all we can focus on is making the most of this time so that when we do return, we can return with some sense of normalcy and get back to watching the sport that we love responsibly and safely. And now it's time for one last break. But when we come back, we're going to take a look at some college football related movies to watch to keep you entertained.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back to the College Football Podcast. Now, in this episode, we talked a lot about the effects of COVID-19 on the college football world and where it looks like it may be going, choices that have been made, things that have already been affected, and the way people are helping. And with all of that being said, in this last segment, we're going to talk a little bit about a few college football related movies to watch to fill the time in between now and whenever college football makes its full return, to kind of fill the feeling of missing football so far. So here are the top 5 college football related movies to watch, starting with The Blind Side, which technically isn't a film that's all about college football. It's actually a little more about high school football, but despite this, it needs to be on the list because there are major college football elements woven all throughout the plot, from the NCAA enforcement to a bubbling high school coach that's supposed to mimic Ole Miss coach Hugh Freeze. And the best part of the movie is when Orr is recruited by a number of SEC coaches, of course. And cameo appearances in this movie are ridiculous, including Nick Saban when he was still at LSU, and Orgeron when he was still at Ole Miss, former Arkansas head coach Houston Nutt, former Tennessee coach Philip Fulmer, former South Carolina coach Luke Holtz, former Auburn coach Tommy Tuberville. So the acting chops on some of them are surprisingly good too, and it's a who's who of college football big names over the last however many decades. And by this time, most of the football world already knows the story of Michael Orr. So The Blind Side is basically his story, growing up in the streets to becoming a star in the NFL. Apparently, he was a little upset that he was made to look a little stupid in the movie, and I sympathize with him on that. But nevertheless, it's still an Oscar winner. It's a true story. It's an absolute tearjerker, and it chronicles this young man's hard-pressed journey into football celebrity with the aid of a woman played by Sandra Bullock, none other than, and it's just a great feel-good movie to watch. And the next movie on the list is Remember the Titans, and this is personally my favorite sports movie of all time, and I can even remember the first time I watched it. And this is a Disney-produced, sentimental civil rights tale, and it honestly is made by the depth of, who else? Denzel Washington. And the story, for anybody who hasn't seen it so far, somehow, follows a man who's trying to integrate football players on a team at a newly integrated high school in a small town, Virginia, in the 1970s. And this town celebrates football like it's holy day. It's one of those towns where football is basically a religion. And he's trying to teach these black and white players an invaluable life lesson along the way. So if only we all had Coach Boone in our life, we would all be in a much better place, obviously. And this film is also a true story, which is one of my favorite aspects about it, and following an African-American coach and his struggle to build a stronger community. And it also uses one of our favorite aspects, football. So it's just the perfect feel-good movie, even though it does have dark elements to it, but it definitely has an optimistic ending. Next on the list is The Waterboy, just to veer into some comedy a little bit. And when it comes to football comedy, Adam Sandler brought us the best acting there is, to say the least. And he plays a mild-mannered Bobby Boucher who transforms into a beast at linebacker somehow. The most unlikely character you would think would become a linebacker. That's who Adam Sandler plays. And Lynn Swann, Lawrence Taylor, Jimmy Johnson, Bill Cowher all made cameo appearances in this movie. So it's another star-studded attraction. It's a who's who, who's famous in football. And the fictional school, South Central Louisiana State University, has to be the best fictional football team name and portrayal in movie history. So in essence, Boucher's buried anger issues rise to the surface when he is teased and he's pushed to the brink and turns into an all-American caliber linebacker, which obviously the premise is ridiculous, but that's part of what makes it such a great movie to watch. And he just had an unreal ability to knock guys flat on any moment's notice. But not only that, but in the final play of the Mud Dogs, which was the team's name, Bourbon Bowl, which is another great name, after being first forbidden and then allowed to play by his own mom, Bobby throws the winning touchdown and then meets his father and then rides off into the sunset with his girlfriend Vicky. So it obviously couldn't be more of a feel-good story, which is exactly what we need right now. And Henry Winkler's portrayal of his coach, Coach Klein, is hysterical, and it just takes a football comedy to the next level, especially for the time period that it came out in the late 90s. So once you see the first tackle, bone-crushing tackle, you're just hooked into the story. So if you haven't seen this movie already, you're probably living under a rock. And it's not Adam Sandler's best movie by any means, but it doesn't change the fact that everybody should probably see it at least once. And if you do and you love football, it's probably one that you're going to enjoy a lot. Next on the list is the quintessential football movie, none other than Rudy. And that reminds us that even the little guy can get it done. And honestly, it wouldn't be far-fetched to say that you can cry every time you watch this movie. There's no shame in that. Just watching the story of Rudy Ruettiger is moving and easily one of the top college football movies in history, if not the top. And this little 5'0", 100-pound, soaking wet Notre Dame walk-on made it his life's mission to walk out of the tunnel for the Fighting Irish. And this is the story of how he accomplished that goal, and it's the ultimate underdog story, especially after his best friend is killed in a tragic car accident, which is what inspired him to set off and accomplish his dreams. So there are a lot of critics that come out when this movie is talked about, and they'll say that, oh, Rudy was offsides, or they'll dismiss it as Notre Dame propaganda, which it probably is. And there's no shortage of Notre Dame propaganda when you look through at college football history. And that's fine. They can say that and it's all valid. But we all love an underdog. Hollywood loves an underdog, even if college football itself doesn't. And it's a truly remarkable film with too many iconic scenes to even count or retell. And no football movie tells a story quite like this in a better way. You can watch it 100 times, and every time you'll get the warm, bubbly feeling inside when you watch Rudy being carried off the field. And that is a lot of what we need right now, and that's why it's the perfect movie to watch at a time like this, to really especially drum up the excitement around college football possibly returning later this year. And the fact that the real-life Rudy Ruettiger was hit with securities fraud years later takes a little bit of a shine off the whole feel-good story, but that doesn't take away from the impact that this movie has. And if there's any time to rewatch Rudy, it would definitely be right now. And the last movie on the list would be The Comebacks. And not because it's some cutting-edge documentary film about college football or some tearjerker like Rudy is, simply just because it's humor that's a little bit more modern. It came out in 2007, so that's still a little bit of a time back, but it was the ultimate spoof movie of other inspirational sports movies, and it's just a lighthearted way to remember what you love about college football while also making fun of it at the same time. And just because there's plenty of extra time to stack up movies to watch, here's an honorable mention that's actually a true documentary film, and that is The Pony Excess. And at a time like this, when we are looking for college content, there's no better time to brush up on your college history, and there is no better place to start than with SMU. And we knew SMU cheated. A lot of people knew SMU cheated. But the NCAA handed down its most severe sanction of all time, the death penalty, because SMU cheated. And this documentary just makes you go, holy crap, they cheated, even if you knew and were aware of the fact that they cheated. Because The Pony Excess completely peels back the curtain into SMU's willingness to break NCAA rules in the name of just winning football games and getting that notoriety and the money that came with it. But the investigation of these said violations caused a fallout that ruined the program for decades. And they are literally still trying to bounce back to this day and have never reached the pinnacle of where they reached in their heyday since. So even if you do know what happened with SMU back in the day, Pony Excess is an eye-opening look into one of the most egregious cases of cheating that the NCAA has ever seen. Thanks for listening to the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'd like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review. That really helps us. Also, please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you, and have a good night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From football to basketball, baseball to MMA, and even soccer. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast.